our group bought the Wild Beyond the Witchlight module. We are a 5-player group and relatively experienced together. Myself, a 24-year-old male, and my friend, a 21-year-old female, wanted to combine our backstories. We both wanted to play the new fairy race and know each other before the campaign. At first, our GM was skeptical about it, because it was weird for him to have a male fairy. After I told him that my character should be joyful, friendly, and sometimes naive, he completely lost it and told me that my idea is stupid and he does not want to have a man-child in his campaign. He allowed my friend to play a fairy, though. All the other players, except for my friend, also found it weird that a guy wants to play a fairy, so I decided to play a halfling instead and avoid further conflict. I simply wanted to play an innocent character and thought a fairy would fit perfectly for that, especially in the Feywild Witchlight setting, but apparently it is wrong for a guy to play one. Imagine being such a man-child that you get offended over some dude just wanting to play the fairy race in a fantasy role-playing game. Come on, guys. Come on. I have played Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games for a good bit, mostly as the DM, but this is from the often rare time where I get to play as the adventurer. Names have been altered because, duh. Our characters consist of Ed, our DM, Mandy, Ed's girlfriend, and an elven wizard named Lynn, name might be wrong because bad memory, Joe, a friend of Ed and mine, playing a halfling bard named Slash, Gabriel, the problem player in question, playing a human cleric named Theogard, me playing a Warforged fighter named G15-0, or Gizo as he was called. Homebrew setting, the plot was very cool, but it doesn't really matter for the story. A little backstory is important to understand what happens next, both in the game's universe and in real life. Gabriel was Ed's and Joe's best friend, and he was invited to our table. They seemed to be good friends, and I was happy we'd have another player join us. He seemed a bit awkward and shy. It was cute at first, but then it began to be a pretty big red flag the more the sessions went on, and it was shown that he was pretty unlikable and downright controlling. He would be telling Ed what to do instead of just letting Ed do his thing, and then proceed to sigh very condescendingly every time Ed chose not to listen to him. Alright, now let's go to an important aspect. My character, Gizo. Gizo was a warforged who deserted his military grounds after developing free will. He adopted a human identity and used a mask to disguise his face, as he was wanted by the kingdom that built him. I also made him pretend to be deformed and mute after time as a soldier, and he would speak through writing in a paper and passing it to the players. It was a pretty fun gimmick and helped hide his identity. During a battle against one of the BBEG's generals, about 8 sessions into the game, a giant, heavily armored minotaur with a giant prosthetic hoof, 1 or 3 turns away from killing him, the minotaur grabbed Gizo, and I rolled a natural 1 on the save, and he threw me against the wall, and it knocked off and broke my mask, revealing my face. The rest of the party finishes killing off the boss, and comes to help me as I'm downed. Confusingly, Gabriel says, "I take off his metal mask and pour the greater healing potion into his face." Ed, no dude, you can't do that. That's not his mask, that is his face.
What do you mean, that's his face?
That's his face. Gizo's face is made of metal. Gabriel just looks confused and steps back in his chair for a second. He stays quiet. Ed makes Mandy roll a history check on me. She succeeds, and then he explains what a Warforged is. As everyone seems pretty excited, Gabriel just looks confused, and that look of confusion doesn't take long to turn into anger? It'll be a while before I forget the crap that came out of that guy's mouth next.
Hey, Ed, DM, can I talk to you for a second? In private?
Gabriel and Ed leave the room and go talk in the kitchen. Joe sighs deeply, and both Mandy and Joe's expressions of excitement fade. I ask what's wrong. Gabe is being Gabe again. I don't know why. Apparently, this wasn't the first time that Gabriel disliked another player's choice and complained to the DM. The two come back after about 10 minutes, and Gabriel just looks mad. Ed looks like he was seconds from jumping from the nearest bridge. Gabriel, in character,
I refuse to heal this unnatural being.
For the next hour or so, Gabriel is almost silent and just stares at me and Ed from time to time with this livid look in his face. My character gets helped by Lynn and Slash, and we continue the rest of the adventure and loot some stuff. Gabriel, in particular, jumped to grab the greatsword the Minotaur had dropped, and stopped me from getting any loot at all. 1 or 2 days after the session, Gabriel texted me directly. I must note that he did not have my number, and I didn't have his either. He was demanding me to retire Gizo and roll up a new character under the excuse that wArFORGed were just robots, and that was breaking the fantasy setting of the game's rules. Obviously, I refused, and that idiot had the audacity to threaten to kick me out of the game if I didn't do so. Just so we're clear, he's not the DM here. Next session, he arrived earlier in Ed's house, and he looks at me with this anger in his eyes. Later, Ed would tell me that he went there earlier just to ask him, the actual DM, to kick me out of the game. The session goes somewhat smoothly. It was a bit hard to ignore the elephant in the room, specifically with how passive-aggressive he was acting, but we progressed through it, up until a certain point in the story. Our characters all go to the tavern, and Slash puts on a show to entertain the folk while we talk to our employer, who contracted us to kill the Minotaur and get our payment. The thing is, this NPC was part of the kingdom that built my character. And when it was revealed that my character was a wArFORGed, I told them my actual backstory, and the same crest that the NPC used was the same crest of this kingdom I was a part of. And let's say that when Gabriel put 2 and 2 together, things went south. Real quick. Gabriel had explicitly told the NPC I was a wArFORGed, more specifically, the wanted wArFORGed. The DM Ed was pretty much forced to follow up with what Gabriel was doing, and I don't blame him. He unmasked me in front of the NPC and blew my cover. All the town's guards converged on me and the other characters while we were trying to escape. Unfortunately, we were caught.
Well, I guess now that they've killed you, you're gonna have to roll up a new character. Hopefully you pick one that fits the game you're actually playing.
Ed, the actual DM, responded by saying, "Oh, actually, Gizo, you weren't killed. They shut your motor down, but you are still alive, and you are now being carried to a prison alongside Lynn." I wish I was able to have a picture of Gabriel's face in that moment. He looked like he was about to pull a knife and stab me and Ed in the spot.
Are you kidding me? You're just gonna let that BS run around as a robot? We're supposed to be playing real D&D, not this sci-fi crap.
Everyone tries to keep their cool, and Ed grabs Gabriel into another room, and we only hear some muffled shouts of BS coming from the kitchen. One other player, Joe, just begins to laugh hysterically, while another, Mandy, just seems concerned. After this session, Ed announced that Gabriel would not be joining us again, and if we wished, he would retcon the events of the guards taking us to the prison, and he'd write that after completing the mission, Theogard, Gabriel's character, got his payment and just left the group. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the last time we heard from him, somehow, but that's a story for another day. We had to stop the campaign due to IRL stuff, and sadly we never got back to it, and I don't think we ever will. In hindsight, I think I should have seen that coming. He was kind of a dick once we started to get along with the rest of the group, even being a bit creepy sometimes to Mandy and some NPCs. Gabriel was also very much a control freak and would act a little similar to this whenever he got nerfed by the DM or when he was told he couldn't do something. TLDR? Cleric player refuses to play in a game with a wArFORGed because it's not true fantasy, demands me to either roll a new character or kick me out, throws a tantrum when he fails to get me killed, and is removed from the game afterwards. Ah yes, the nerd rage quit, a staple of RPG horror stories. This actually conveniently matches with the intro story, that never happens. At the end of the day, guys, fantasy is fantasy. It's fiction. It's created. It's manufactured. We make it in our minds. Fantasy doesn't have some rule set that you need to follow every single time. You don't need to have orcs or humans or elves. You can get creative with it. I've seen people claim that fantasy from certain cultures isn't true fantasy. Fantasy written after a certain time period isn't true fantasy, and that's all BS, guys. It's as simple as that. Also, throwing a temper tantrum when the DM doesn't do exactly what you want, yeah, that's not great either. I was looking for players to play in my online Cursor Strahd campaign. We're halfway through and need some new players to have consistent sessions. I got 2 players off of Reddit. I'm going to call the problem player Anon. After some interviews, it seems like they were fairly interesting and had interesting ideas, and Anon actually went through half of Cursor Strahd already. Anon used to play 3.5 and has a long history in D&D, so it seemed like a good fit, right? The first session he was supposed to show up at, he was actually spending the night in jail after not paying an old ticket and missing the court date. He showed up the next session just fine. We had a big battle at the winery and it was actually quite fun. Shortly after, though, the next session I got a message from him saying he'll be late. Fair enough. He comes to the session an hour late, and during the whole time, his wife periodically was yelling at him. What was he in trouble for? From what we picked up, his wife in the back was complaining that Anon shat all over the bathroom floor and didn't clean it up. Anon gave her an infamous line,
Shut up, I'm playing D&D right now. Go away.
Then, the next session, he passed out after smoking Kush Kush for 4 hours straight as we were supposed to start. Basically, missing the session. Easiest kick of my life. Thankfully, the other player was a very chill guy that we had a lot of fun with. Moral of the story? Vet your players with a grain of salt. There are so many questions. So many more questions than answers. But I think the top one on my mind is, how the hell did this guy get a wife? At the end of the day, I know some people are going to be doubting the validity or truthfulness of the story, and I don't blame you. It is absolutely ridiculous, but I have met people like this. They absolutely exist, and I'm sure that at least a couple of them play D&D. Alright, next story. A decade or so ago, in the army, I got roped into a D&D game. I hadn't had a chance to play in years, and I was looking forward to it. It turned out it was the DM's first game ever, and he was DMing. Well, I figured it might be awkward or slow, but I kept an open mind. We went to create characters, we were told it was D&D 3.5, 32 point buy starting at level 3. Anything from the core rules was allowed. Anything, but for plot reasons, he wanted at least one arcane spellcaster in the party. He didn't give us any input about the setting as we were creating characters, so we all generally presumed it was a typically vaguely Western European Tolkien-esque fantasy setting, as is typical for Dungeons & Dragons. I suggested I play a human paladin. He backpedaled on his idea that anything from core rules went, saying that the setting he was using had a lot of moral nuances and gray areas in his setting and it might not be suitable for paladins. Okay, interesting choice for a setting for a novice DM. Alright, I'll play a chaotic good human bard, level 3. We all create our characters. I think it was a bard, a fighter, a rogue, a druid, and a monk. It's been a while, but I remember there was no clerics, paladins, or primary arcane casters like he requested. We spend half of the evening just making the characters. He then explains to us, after character creation, that the setting is to be some gothic Eastern European thing, and tells us that the oppressive church of the monotheistic religion has declared all arcane magic to be heretical, and they're seeking to exterminate it all. So he wants to start the game. He goes into the long-winded narration of gothic gloom and Eastern European dread that seemed to be the Ravenloft retreat. Talks about how there's something mysterious happening off the swamps to the east and how we go to investigate, and the ferry takes us to a bog where this huge tentacled monster arises from the swamp and attacks us. Cue a really long, elaborate fight sequence that takes a couple of hours on its own. We win, but it burns through a lot of HP and spells. The DM then says that seconds after we kill the monster, we are surrounded by soldiers in all armor, wearing the heraldry of the church, saying that we are heretics and must be put to death for our heresies of using magic and accepting help from magic users. Okay, so I guess this is another fight. The DM seemed surprised that we launched out into a fight against them. He actually sputtered, "But they're paladins," when the bard said he was firing his crossbow at the head knight that was saying he has to be put to death. Well, the fight starts. The DM seems confused. He didn't expect us to fight, apparently, but he ran the fight once it started. It's bad. It goes poorly. We drag on, but we are clearly overpowered as our party of 5 was outnumbered by a dozen or so paladins. It turns into a TPK. The entire party was dead in that bog. All the players given death glares by the DM, who said he didn't understand why we fought. They were paladins. They were the good guys? We were simply supposed to quietly surrender and be taken off and chained to the castle for the next part of the plot. We tried explaining to him that there was no way our characters were just going to surrender and allow themselves to be taken off to be executed. The DM's response was, "But I had an escape for you all planned." Which, of course, we couldn't know was the case. I hope you learned a lot from that night because it played out like a complete disaster. We didn't meet up for any further sessions. Nobody seemed to be trying to restart that campaign after that disastrous first session. Okay, here's some good advice. DMs out there, do not expect the players to just surrender. Ever. Matt Colville, one of the best D&D YouTubers and probably one of the better DMs in the entire world, tried that, and it didn't work out for him. He called it a complete disaster, and if he can't handle it, us mere mortals cannot hope to handle it either. Players do not surrender. Will they run away from a fight? Will they surrender after they tussle around a little bit? Yeah, sure, maybe. But will they surrender immediately off the bat, especially with the guards threatening to haul them off for execution? No. Never. Never, ever. Do not base your session off that. Don't base your first session off that. Look, this guy is new. I get it. This is more an RPG naivete story. The guy hasn't DM'd before, so I understand what's going on here. My first session was rocky. Everyone's first session is rocky. No big deal. This was particularly rocky, and I do hope he learned from it. But yeah, that's the top takeaway from this story. Been running a campaign for a group of folks found via a local Facebook TTRPG group. I let too many people in and realized it too late. 7 players is just so draining for reasons that aren't relevant to this post. However, because of that, I announced that we were starting the finale arc a while back. And after we were going through some non-5th edition stuff, I did this because I want a break from 5th edition. No hate, but 3 players were already expressing that they only play D&D and nothing else. 2 of those players are power gamers that refuse to RP and basically never roll less than an 18, and 1 doesn't pay attention or plays Switch during the session. Ultimately, it was just a bunch of people I did not want to DM for anymore. Their styles just did not fit with the kind of group I want to run or the story I want to play. Train conductor of this wreck, the rogue. Traits: suspiciously high rolls all the time, and he never rolls less than an 18. Controversial opinions, too. Stage 1, leaving station. Next up, awkward. During their final dungeon crawl to BBEG, 2 characters use Featherfall and jump down into a deep pit of the Underdark. The rest take time to get down. 2 characters, the cleric and the rogue, then have sex while waiting for the party in-game, which I hate and didn't think I needed to explicitly ban, but anyway. The weekend we were all getting together for a river float IRL. We've done stuff as a group of 4. I bow out last minute, then find out that the cleric and the rogue got trashed in real life, and actual adult activities ensued. Now, that kind of stuff has happened in game and out of game. Superb. No way it's gonna get worse than this. Oh, so this is what being an ALO is like. Stage 2. Next stop, station cringe. The cleric and the rogue have a brief IRL relationship in which she, the cleric, ends it due to rogue being super freaking clingy and needy, like freaking out if she didn't respond immediately to a text and saying if she didn't respond in X amount of minutes, he would go to her house to check on her. She ends that relationship. We skip 2 sessions. We usually have 1 per week, but 1 had to go due to illness, 1 had to go due to another player being weirded out by the romance situation in real life. Stage 3, betrayal. And last night was it, the finale, the BBEG culmination of months of story and campaign. It was also our first session since the romance and breakup between the cleric and the rogue in real life. I was anxious how this awkwardness could spill into game. I committed to just running the finale for those who showed up and praying everyone would just be cool and keep the drama out. After the finale, the rogue would be leaving due to not playing any non-5th edition systems. Sounds fine. Awkward, but fine. Everyone's being cordial and happy, so I think everything's good. We start the BBEG fight, and the rogue is doing very good. Almost too good of a job avoiding damage, conserving resources, and topping health off with potions or requesting healing. He gets visibly frustrated when they learn the boss has a second phase. He keeps asking if the boss is about to die, looking impatient. Maybe he's just bored? Players get distracted with in-real-life stuff. The cleric regales a story of an in-real-life romantic encounter with a person who had a giant Confederate flag tattooed on their chest. Reactions occur. The rogue then gets offended and begins to lecture us on the Confederate flag not being bad and stuff. I'm not going to debate. It was not an appropriate topic for the game table. Then, with no input or desire for others to transition to a new topic, none of these topics are game related, by the way, he breaks out with racism isn't real. He continues ranting about this argument while me and the other players are making eye contact and having silent conversations that basically amounted to, what? He stopped talking long enough for me to bring attention back to the game. As we're about to beat the Phase 2 boss, the BBEG's weapon, basically magic plant that feeds off people's psychic energy, opens, signaling a new user can enter to wrest control of this weapon from the BBEG. However, they know that whoever does this will have to choose between ultimate power or sacrificing themselves to kill it. The cleric had told me weeks ago that she wanted to sacrifice herself but didn't tell the party. She took the opportunity to enter and start this process. I was about to switch from initiative to narrative when the rogue says,
"Can I do something?"
I respond, "What do you want to do?"
"I stab her."
The cleric, aka the girl who dumped him,
"In the heart."
And in the stunned silence and awkward laughs, because we all assumed that was a joke, he and his in real life son announced they've been planning to betray the party. His son doesn't seem to have a clear grasp of the plan besides kill party and keeps asking the rogue, his dad, what to do. Okay, where did this kid come from? Has he been here this whole time? What? Okay, well, at this point, I failed as a DM. I didn't shut it down. I kept asking the rogue why, hoping to keep this as a role-play encounter or find some way to salvage it. Nope, other players are pissed now, and they roll initiative, and PvP starts. This was meant to begin an epilogue scene, not this. The rogue and his son proceed to kill the rest of the party. I eventually picked up my jaw from the ground and moved it back to the narrative and resolved it the very best I could. Everyone's mega done at this point. Nobody's happy. My phone's blowing up from people texting me, what the hell, and asking me if I knew that this would happen. The rogue and son are proud of themselves and then stand up and ask if we're meeting next week. No. We need a breather. And that's my train wreck. I now have several new rules added to my session 0. Also, other players and I have discussed retconning the session without the rogue and son and resolving that narrative for closure. There was so much there. For starters, I have said in the past that if 2 partners want to play D&D, that's perfectly okay. But this is the ultimate example of why a lot of people want to avoid that. Now, is this a common occurrence? I certainly hope not, but I don't think so. Look, again, like I've said multiple times, at this point becoming a broken record, it's okay to play D&D with your partner as long as this doesn't happen, as long as there's an understanding of what is at stake if there's some kind of dramatic moment in the relationship. As long as everyone's mature about it, it should be fine, but damn, this story really is something. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more episodes of this series, as well as my other content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own thoughts or stories, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment drama to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.